At the end of matric, I'd done well and I applied to Oxford and I went for the interviews and I bombed the interviews. I was a disaster. I still remember the philosophy Don asking me whether animals can think, and I still don't know whether animals can think, but I bombed that. That was like 10 minutes of the interview gone on me trying to explain my answer to that, and I didn't get it. So I convinced my mom, please let me apply to America. She had said, no way, you can't go to America. It's this cultural machine that'll chow you and you'll never come back, you're not going. But she got upset that Oxford didn't let me in, she said, fine, apply. So on the last day possible, 31st December, I put in an application with my matric results, did the tests after the deadline date, which was allowed, and got in. And I'd never been to America. So I went to America, did my undergrad in economics. Then the Oxford story came back. I came back and applied for the Rhodes Scholarship in South Africa, didn't get the Rhodes. At the time, they felt that I was probably just the South African kid who wanted to live abroad and was coming back and using an opportunity for South Africans that would never benefit South Africa ultimately. I was in America, wanted to go to England, and this was just a pass-through again. So they said no, and so I went to work on Wall Street. And I can talk about the experiences there, but just the sort of the theme of failure leading to success. One of the things that I like that we do at Awethu is we go hard at an idea, and if it works, we keep going and scale it, and if we don't, we pivot quickly. And that often is uncomfortable, especially the bigger the team gets. But if you do that and that becomes the culture of the organization, that's how you build to something that works. It doesn't work at the start for the most part, especially if you're young and haven't had much experience. You're going to get things wrong at the start. But we built and we learned, and we try to collect fees from entrepreneurs. It was a disaster. We didn't collect any fees. We aimed to break even on the 20 million rand investment. We collected about 80,000 rand in profit sharing fees. And then we had to put a fee freeze on because none of the entrepreneurs wanted to pay us. And we basically got to a point where we were like, okay, well, either we're going to work with entrepreneurs and create jobs because we know they're creating jobs, but they're not reporting any of the jobs because they don't want to pay the fees associated with that. So what are we going to do? So we put a fee freeze on. Immediately, job creation went through the roof, but we had no fees. So the fee creation thing didn't work. Our job creation rate was quite low. It was half a job per entrepreneur in our incubator. So we created 250 jobs in the project, but we learned a ton. And we went back to the jobs fund and said, okay, hey, can you fund us let us finish this job. We've learned so much. Let us show what we've learned and improve our efficacy. And they gave us another 70 million rand. And with that 70 million, we went to over 2,000 entrepreneurs. In fact, the last cohort just finished in March. And they now, on average, a graduate creates 1.5 jobs at a cost per job of about 20,000 rand to the South African taxpayer, which is one of the lowest cost job creation solutions in the country, but still, it's a cost. This is not a commercial business yet. It's not making money. But it is a social impact mechanism which government can now use. They can choose between putting money in a stadium, in a street, in a hospital, and they can pay 20,000 rand to create jobs through this micro incubator. Okay. So from those small examples of working with those 6 entrepreneurs, we raised, in increments, but we raised money, 3 million rand, 20 million rand, 70 million rand, and now we've raised over 450 million rand to invest in this mission of using entrepreneurship to build a fair South Africa. And we have 2 businesses. One is a micro incubator, which works with the most informal micro entrepreneurs in the country, and another which is a private equity fund, which makes much bigger ticket investments. So on average, 10 million rand investment into well-established SMEs to help them either to grow if they're black-owned or to transform if they're white-owned. And so that's what we do. So we have those 2 businesses, micro incubator and the private equity fund manager. The micro incubator, we've actually taken a big step we launched last week our attempt at taking things to real scale. We've incubated 2,000 entrepreneurs, and that's really good scale. It makes it a big incubator, but we wanted to be able to get opportunity to everyone in the country, in fact, in the developing world who wants it. And so the whole concept is, okay, well, we've learned all these things. How do we get those to everybody? And we've created a mobile platform for doing that. So the way that's going to commercialize at the start is just through sponsorship. It's access to a group of potential consumers of products. So at the start, the banks, the cell phone companies, the fast-moving consumer goods companies, they're interested in that, and then they can also use their BEE money to fund that. And so the basic business model is that, and then over time, I think you can add products just the same way as any of these community-based online platforms do. You can add products. So whether we start charging entrepreneur subscription fees, or whether we start lending to entrepreneurs because now we have all this data about their businesses, because one of the things on the app is a bookkeeping tool, we'll start to add those into the model over time. And then the private equity fund just runs like a private equity fund manager. It's you get carry and you get management fees, and if the businesses succeed, then you make money, and if they don't, then you don't. But it's a pretty straightforward model on that side. Why I think entrepreneurship is so important to the future of the country is because a few things. One is the entrepreneurial mindset, and how I just think it's a very healthy mindset to have no matter what your context, in that it's all about problem solving. It's all about taking advantage of opportunity. It's all about seeing the positive as opposed to the negative. If there is uncertainty like we have in South Africa, if there is, never miss the opportunity for it, never, what's that saying? Never miss a good crisis, or whatever it is. If there are problems, you can either complain about the problems, which I think we have developed quite a negative mindset in South Africa about, okay, we know how to bring things down, and I think that's the history of apartheid. And the anti-apartheid movement was, we're against this thing and we're going to bring this thing down. Whereas what we need now is a culture which says, okay, we need to be for something as well, and we need to build things. So it was, there's a great culture of resistance, but now what comes after? And entrepreneurship really speaks to that. And so I think it's a really powerful concept just in terms of the mindset that it requires. And then in terms of what entrepreneurs become in their communities, is that it's at this amazing sort of intersection of leadership and economics, because you can be a leader, which is great. You take responsibility for moving things forward, etc. But you can be really undercut if the people who don't agree with you have all the money. You might have the right principles, but if you don't have money dictates a lot of things, right? And entrepreneurship is at this amazing intersection. Whether you're talking about a leader on the JSE, or whether you're talking about somebody who runs a great small business on their street, that person is at the intersection of leadership, showing how things can be done, and problem solving and creating, but then also having the economic levers. They employ people, they have revenue coming in, they have the ability to influence the way they want the world to be through economics as well. So in terms of the entrepreneurial mindset and in terms of that nexus, I think entrepreneurship is this amazing vehicle for creating change, the kind of change that we need in South Africa. And that's why, to me, it's so exciting. Apart from the fact that I'm an entrepreneur myself, so I wanted to start a business. I didn't want to start a charity. Not that there's anything wrong with charities, that wasn't my personal passion. I wanted to be an entrepreneur for entrepreneurs, and that's why we went into this. So one of the best things about Awethu and working with entrepreneurs is that you become friends with entrepreneurs. And so one of my friends is a guy called Tulani Nchinche. So he came into Awethu, he talked about his entrepreneurial flair, or his inclination when he was young. He used to go to the tuck shop and take money from all the girls who didn't want to get stuck in this huge line at the tuck shop in his school. And he'd get 50 cents from each of them and go stand in the line for them. And then he got other people to do that. And he said, well, he came to Awethu and he's learned about formalization and all these fancy terms in business. And he realized that what he was doing was actually called franchising, because he set up these little micro franchises of guys who would go and do exactly what he did and then pay him a royalty. So he came in with no business, no idea, no training. And in our incubator, we helped him to think through, okay, well, what might a decent startup be, just to get you on the ladder. And one of the ideas he came up with was a waterless car wash, and he started that with us with very light touch support. And I think that's one of the big things we've learned, is that entrepreneurship is special because entrepreneurs drive it. Entrepreneurship is not special because other people drive it. If other people are driving the outcome for you, that's not entrepreneurship, that's something else. It's, if there's a spectrum from independence to dependency, that's more on this side. And so it has to be driven by you. So he came in, started this thing. He ended up employing 4 or 5 people in 2 different locations. And then we started an equity fund in partnership with government. And part of our concept was we're looking for great entrepreneurs, great jockeys, and then we're looking for great horses. They don't have to come together. You're bringing together ideas, people, and capital, and then creating businesses. So Tulani was given a choice of 25 businesses, and the concept that he chose was a fire safety business, where we had a contract locked in, and he really liked the coach that he was going to be working with. So he started that business, and that was 3 years ago. And so he's been running, with the investment of our equity fund and with our coaches, this business called 5 Star Fire, which their most famous ad, you probably haven't heard of it because it's a very tiny business, but I thought their most famous ad was very funny. It's on their t-shirt, they said, 5 Star Fire, we even service fire pools. And he's been running that for 3 years. He's now a fully formalized part of the economy. He employs himself and one other person. He employs 3 subcontractors, each of whom he's paying 40 grand a month. He's paying taxes. He makes a good living for himself. He's convinced his entire family, who at the start were entirely unconvinced that he should be an entrepreneur at all, that this is the right thing to do, and in fact has become not just a role model for them, but through the media and the attention that his story gets paid, a role model for the country. And what I love about it is, I think there's a tendency to tell these 1 in a million stories, which is somebody just out of nowhere becomes a billionaire, and that's amazing, which is, of course, that's extraordinary, and you need to tell that, but that's not the experience of most people. Most people's experience, and what will really speak to them, is someone like Tulani. Do you know what I mean? The fact that he's building this thing gradually. It's been probably in total 4.5 years now, and now he's bought his first car, and it's a car he always wanted to buy, and he's got the respect of his family and his community, and he's doing something that he loves, and he's clearly developing skills, and over that, and in 5 years' time, the story will be exponentially better. It's not, it's not a billion rand story necessarily, but it's a story that people can relate to, and that's how you build a culture. So the reason that I got into this form of leadership is because I wanted to have systemic impact. And that, I think that's just, I wanted to have systemic impact, and I don't think there's anything better or worse about systemic impact than impact on each individual's life. That's just a personal thing for me, that if I was going to go into something with everything that I have for the rest of my life and make the sacrifices needed, I wanted to do it in a way that could affect everybody, not just affect a few people. But I didn't actually know what that meant when I was 26. I probably still don't know as I'm sitting here. I think I have a much better grasp of it now. But understanding scale, you need to go through the process of even building a business from 1 person to 50 people, so that you can understand how you get to 100, to 1,000, to 10,000, But that North Star of large-scale systemic change has always been there. And so where we are now is at a really exciting point where I think, this is my 8-year anniversary. I'm 34 now. I feel like we're at a point in both the micro incubator and the fund manager where proper scale is possible. On the micro incubator, using this mobile platform, like I said to you before, we supported 2,100 entrepreneurs in 8 years. In 15 days, 3,500 people have downloaded our app. If that app starts to have any kind of efficacy like what the in-person incubator has, it's going to by far outstrip the impact. And already today, what I love is that, let me start with what makes me angry and what I hate in South Africa. I hate seeing people who have something in them and then you can't help them to realize that thing. Let's say you go outside the city, or you on a daily basis, you see people. Say, for example, the guy who was selling newspapers in Parkhurst on Sunday, and I was speaking to him. Now he's putting in the work. He's on a Sunday all day there, trying to make some money. People don't want to buy newspapers anymore, so he's struggling with that. It's just an arduous, horrible job. And I talked to him about, okay, well, what other options do you have? He said, I'm very interested I want to make money, I want to start my own business, but I don't really know how. So now I'm talking to him at the street corner, and how am I supposed to help him? This intervention is a way to help every single person who wants an opportunity in life, but now hasn't had a real opportunity. It's at least something. It might not be going to Harvard, but it's something to start and get on the ladder. So I'm happy about that. But the next step is how much impact does it really have? And so the goal of that is not just to launch across South Africa, but to go across the whole continent, across the developing world, giving informal micro-entrepreneurs, the kind of people who have never really been paid attention to by the formal sector, paid attention to by society, giving people real opportunity to make more money and improve their lives through business. And we're on that, like we're going really hard at that now. We want 20,000 people using the app and the associated system in the next 3 months, and in the next, as soon as possible, but to be across the continent, across the developing world. I think we're looking at starting a pilot in Kenya in January next year. So that's on the one side of the business. On the private equity side, we're looking at whether we can really change the way transformation works in the country using the equity model and the entrepreneurship model we've developed. And the thesis there is much more of a nation-building thesis, where we know that there are big problems, structural problems in how transformation works. You've got lots of talented black people, especially young people in corporates, who want to do something entrepreneurial but don't have the capital. They have the skills, they don't have the capital, and they don't have the safety net that's required to be able to take that risk because they're providing for so many people. On the other side of things, you've got a ton of white-owned businesses where people want to be part of the new South African narrative, want to be part of the transformation narrative, have the right values for trying to achieve what transformation is trying to achieve, but the models aren't there to assist them. They don't have the networks. They're not comfortable with the way past PE structures have worked, and so then they sit untransformed. And so you have these two pools of people who you could bring together but aren't being brought together. And so on the equity side, we're trying to bring those guys together, but at scale, not just to create a role model for how transformation could work, but to actually create a meaningful asset. So what we're trying to create there is a 2.5 billion rand asset initially. Our main partners at the start are SAB and now Imperial. And that's where the bulk of our money's been raised. So SAB's made a 300 million rand commitment to transform their supply chain using this approach. And we want to do that quickly. And so with that starting point with them, Imperial and a few other partners, build this 2.5 billion rand asset which can be shown to the country as to say, look, despite all the problems we have, this thing can work. And this is what success could look like. Because I think if we're missing anything since the days of Madiba, it's a vision for the country. He presented a vision. You talked about role modeling and mentorship and leadership. I think one of the main reasons I am doing what I'm doing is because of the role model that Madiba provided, and it's still something that I think about. As you walk into our office, there's a picture of him standing there just after he got out of prison saying, "Let freedom reign." And I met him a few times, but he didn't influence me one-on-one. He influenced me just by this role model that I knew about. And I hope that Awethu, as a sort of, apart from the direct impact we can have, we can also role model how things could be so that the country ultimately improves both through the direct impact we have, but also through this indirect impact. A great example of how you bring together white-owned businesses that want to transform with excellent black talent that just needs the opportunity is a hops farm that we've bought in partnership with SAB in the George area. So the white owners of the farm were pretty much, they wanted a way out of the hops industry and were going to sell the farm. And SAB, it was really important to SAB that farm stayed transformed and that it remained a hops farm, because that's a key commitment they've made, is to increase the amount of hop production in the country. At the same time, you've got this entrepreneur, her name's Beverly Ann Joseph. Her dad, she's 30, she's my age, about my age. Her dad worked on the farms growing up. She's a colored South African. Her dad worked on the farms growing up. She managed to get a scholarship to go and study agriculture. Then she ended up doing a master's in hops farming, and for 10 years ran the SAB's experimental hops farm. So in terms of hops farming expertise in the country, she was a subject matter expert. She always wanted to own a farm. She had done small entrepreneurial projects on the side, property development, etc., but didn't have the capital to buy a farm herself, because the farm is, call it a 10 million rand investment. And then the Thrive Fund was started between us and SAB, where she saw this opportunity. She wanted to, in order to progress at SAB, she would have had to move to Joburg. She didn't want to do that. She wanted to be an entrepreneur and to stay in her community. And so we bought this farm, and she moved in March, and she's running the farm now full time. She's just had her first harvest. She's just, for example, I think there's an example of how this then translates into changes in people's lives, because just changing from white to black ownership in a worst case, can just create a tier of elite black people, which doesn't change inequality in the country or necessarily anything else. To give you an example of how it does change things, she went in there and was unhappy with the conditions that the farm workers were living in, which obviously famously the alcohol industry or the wine industry, or sorry, just the farming industry in general, has not provided great conditions to farm workers. She went in, was unhappy. She raised the issue with AB InBev, and AB InBev immediately provided the financing as a grant to change the entire living area of all the workers that came, both the permanent workers and the temporary workers, the 50 or so temporary workers that came every season to farm the hops. And so immediately in the lives of those people, apart from this role model now, who's the first black and female hops farmer on the continent, you've also got at a sub-level changes to the lives of the people who work there. And I think as a result, because I mean, that's where Bev comes from, that's her community. The reason she wanted to stay there is to influence that community. And so she's doing that immediately. And so you see the knock-on effects of transforming things properly. I spoke about the subject of scale earlier and how Awethu is the social business. But the primary goal is to create positive social impact, but we don't believe that that's possible without us being a real business which creates profit. Primarily because you can't raise enough capital. If you create profit, if you generate profit, you can use that profit to reinvest. You're sustainable yourself, but you can also raise capital from financial markets to scale properly. If you want to have large-scale systemic impact in the country, on the continent, in the world, it's very hard to do that as a charity. It's much easier to do that as a proper business. And so Awethu is a business, it's not a charity, and that's really important to us. And I think that really speaks to something quite important in my own sort of approach to leadership, because as a second order thing of what Awethu is trying to do is to define this paradigm of social enterprise, to be a success story for social business, where you can lead with impact but also make money. Because I think the world has, in the last century, been too much defined in binary terms. Race as a binary thing, gender as a binary thing, your political views as binary, your views on whether you're a capitalist or a communist, that they're all so binary and so extreme, but the truth of our lived experience is not extreme. The truth is in the middle. The truth is in the gray, and that's actually the history of my life in a way. There's my parents, so you don't have a race. You're this mixed race kid. You're down the middle. You can't say I'm white, I'm black, I'm Indian. You're this mixed thing that you don't have. I still don't even know the name for my race. I just say mixed race or other dash something. You know what I mean? I'm a mixed race South African. Fine. Academically, studying finance and then studying African studies, you see the difference between the people who want to go and work in investment banks, the best people in the world, and then the best people in the world who want to help people through academic study. And these people don't understand each other at all. But if you can be down the middle, you can help them to connect. And even it goes to the extent of, even like in sport, I did this thing called modern pentathlon, which is running, swimming, fencing, horse riding, and shooting. I wasn't good enough to be really good at one single thing, but to be good at all of them is an interdisciplinary thing where you again are like able to bring the disciplines together in a way that creates value. And I think that's social business as well. Bring these two things, the social impact piece and the business piece, together in a way that creates really positive value for everybody. And so that's why I think that's kind of a mark of my identity and a mark of how I lead, is seeing the way to bring things together and to operate in the gray. And it's difficult to operate in the gray because things aren't extreme and they aren't very defined, and you've got to get people on board. But if you can do it, you can create a lot of value. And I think if you're brave about doing it, people do go with you because it actually speaks to their own experiences, because people don't live in these extremes. They live a lot more in the gray than we typically are willing to accept. So the advice that I'd give to young South African entrepreneurs is a fewfold. I think the first thing that I notice about us as a country and us as an entrepreneurial culture is that we focus extremely on our own issues. We're very closed off as a result of various things in our history and our geography and all these, that we're trying to solve South African problems and grow South African businesses, etc. And I think we have, in many respects, the education and the environment which allow us to solve global problems. And so the first thing I'd say is, we have to think much more globally, because businesses are just going to increasingly it's required of us as entrepreneurs to do that. Even just to survive, you have to have a global standard. So the first thing is set your standards to the global level and think about global problems. The second thing is bring that way down and get involved in the details immediately, because if we're going to build this entrepreneurial culture and get the number of entrepreneurs involved in entrepreneurship in the country up, people have to get started. And that you don't start here, you don't start with Uber, you start with, man, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to go and, like how we started in Alex, just go and meet entrepreneurs and understand your problem, and just be as humble as possible in the scale at which you start, while retaining those ambitions. And then the third thing, I like the idea that, so I'll say the third thing and then like one catch-all sort of approach to entrepreneurship. The third thing I would say in this context is that everyone's worried in South Africa. I think that Trevor Noah joke about how with the first two administrations, the only people talking about leaving the country were white people, and then he knew things were really bad when he started seeing, when the latest administration came in and he saw young black South Africans being like, how much is a ticket to Australia again? Then he knew things were really bad. I think a lot of South Africans are thinking about these problems at the moment and feeling concerned. My approach is really to try to control what I can control. And that's what entrepreneurship is a lot about, is that in these problems, there's huge opportunities. We can take those opportunities and we can really try to operate in a way that makes things better in the things that we control. And if enough of us do that, that's not obviously the overall answer to the problem, but I think it's a way that we can operate that makes our day-to-day living in this chaos much more manageable, much more palatable, much more controlled, than saying, you know what, downgrade this problem, that problem. None of it we can control. Therefore, we wake up feeling depressed and concerned and not doing what we can do. And so I think controlling what we control is really important. And as just one thing of advice to all entrepreneurs, people try to tell you, this is the one lesson for entrepreneurs. And I try to do that and I can't do it. But what I really do like is the idea that entrepreneurship is about a million lessons. And so it's not about one thing. It's about how quickly can you learn those lessons, finding the most efficient way to learn those lessons. So if you focus on that, being the best possible learner and getting to grips with all these lessons and implementing them as quickly as you possibly can, that's how you're going to have the most success.